Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving deep into Sigmund Freud's A General Introduction to Psychoanalysis.
Yeah, we've got articles, research notes, the whole shebang.
Our mission, to cut through the noise and give you the most intriguing insights from Freud's work. Not just what he said, but why it matters, even today.
And with a touch of deep dive humor, of course. Freud had a sharp wit, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Now, right off the bat, Freud sets a different tone. He doesn't offer quick fixes,
Right.
or easy solutions.
No, he actually describes psychoanalysis as a demanding process for both the patient and the analyst.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's almost like he's saying patients have to be active participants in their own healing.
Yeah, it's self-discovery, not passively receiving treatment.
Yeah.
Freud even compares it to, like, an archaeological dig.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, carefully excavating those layers of the unconscious mind.
It stresses confidentiality. Can't just listen in on a psychoanalysis session.
Right.
It's all about creating that safe space,
Yeah.
for revealing deeply personal thoughts and feelings.
Exactly, yeah.
But this idea of the unconscious, this hidden realm influencing our thoughts and actions, it's almost like, how much control do we really have?
That's the question, isn't it? I mean, what Freud is proposing is that so much of what drives us operates beneath the surface. Like an iceberg, only the tip is visible.
Okay, so how do we even begin to glimpse this hidden world, this iceberg?
Well, Freud points to those everyday blunders we all make. Slips of the tongue, forgetting names.
Losing things.
Losing things, yeah. He argues these aren't just random accidents,
Oh, interesting.
but often reveal glimpses of our unconscious desires or conflicts.
He uses a pretty funny example to illustrate this, right?
Yeah.
It's about a stage actor, overcome by stage fright, who's supposed to announce, Conatable sheathes his sword, but instead blurts out, comfortable, sends back his steed. It's like his unconscious desires snuck out, disguised as a verbal stumble.
Exactly. Freud called these parapraxes, and he saw them as a way the unconscious expresses itself.
Wow. So it's like, even when we try to control what we say, our unconscious can still slip out.
Yeah, despite our conscious intentions.
So those moments where we say or do something we didn't mean to,
Right.
could they be our unconscious mind trying to tell us something? And this is where it gets really fascinating. Freud believed dreams offer a direct line to this hidden realm.
The royal road to the unconscious, he called it.
He proposed that dreams are coded messages, often fulfilling wishes or expressing anxieties we may not even consciously acknowledge.
Like, for instance, dreams about flying
Yeah.
might represent a yearning for freedom or escape.
So it's like our unconscious is speaking in symbols.
Precisely. And that's why dream interpretation is so important in psychoanalysis,
Yeah.
decoding the symbols, the hidden meanings.
To unlock those unconscious desires and anxieties.
Exactly.
And then things get even more complex when Freud brings childhood experiences into the equation.
Right.
He argues that our early experiences, particularly those related to family and sexuality, they profoundly shape us, our adult personalities, our relationships.
This is where the Oedipus complex comes in.
Oh, yes.
A controversial theory, to be sure. But essentially, Freud suggests that during childhood, we develop these unconscious sexual desires for our opposite sex parent. And of course, this leads to rivalry, especially with the same-sex parent.
Now, to clarify for our listeners who might be new to this, the Oedipus complex isn't about literal adult sexuality.
Right.
It's more about the child's developing sense of self, their attachments, the complexities of early family dynamics. But there's a lot more to unpack here. It's like Freud is saying our adult lives are shaped by these early experiences we might not even remember.
Yeah.
How do we reconcile that with, our sense of agency, our free will?
That's a question that cuts to the core of Freudian thought. It challenges us to consider these hidden forces, the ones that might be shaping our choices, our behaviors.
But maybe it also invites us to explore how those forces might be understood.
Right, exactly.
And even navigated to some extent through analysis and self-awareness. And speaking of symbols, Freud dives deep into dream symbolism, suggesting that certain objects and actions in dreams often represent something deeper. Recurring symbols with consistent meanings, he called them.
Constant relationship.
Constant relationships between a dream element and its interpretation. For instance, he suggests houses often symbolize the human body.
With separate rooms representing different aspects of ourselves.
Oh, wow.
And then there are staircases.
Oh, I bet those have an interesting Freudian interpretation.
They certainly do. Often representing, shall we say, the act of sexual intercourse.
All right, we'll have to save that for later in our deep dive. But we've uncovered some fascinating insights already, haven't we?
We have.
Into Freud's ideas about the unconscious, the meaning of mistakes, the power of dream interpretation.
It's really remarkable when you think about it. Imagine being a patient back then, being told that your seemingly random thoughts and dreams actually held deep meaning,
Yeah.
that they could reveal hidden parts of yourself. It must have been both unsettling and incredibly liberating.
Absolutely. It's like he's giving us a new language to understand our inner world.
Mm-hmm.
But we've only just scratched the surface of Freud's A General Introduction to Psychoanalysis.
Oh, there's so much more to explore.
There's so much more, including how these unconscious desires, these conflicts, can manifest in what Freud called neuroses.
Right, the psychological and emotional disturbances that many of us experience.
And how we can use the talking cure, psychoanalysis itself, to bring those hidden conflicts to light.
Yeah, to work towards healing.
Towards self-understanding. So stay tuned as we continue our deep dive into the mind with Sigmund Freud. Welcome back to our deep dive into Freud's A General Introduction to Psychoanalysis. Last time we were talking about this hidden world of the unconscious. Those desires, those conflicts, we're often not even aware of, and how it reveals itself through things like slips of the tongue, even our dreams. But dreams can be so bizarre, so nonsensical. How do we even begin to make sense of them?
Well, Freud argued that dreams are kind of like coded messages, you know? He called the dream, like what we actually experience, the manifest content.
Right.
Which is often confusing, strange, because it's disguise.
By the unconscious mind.
Exactly, by the unconscious mind. He called this dream distortion. And it's how our deepest desires, our anxieties, bypass that watchful eye of our conscious mind.
So it's like our unconscious is speaking this secret language to protect us from potentially disturbing, unacceptable thoughts and feelings.
You could say that, yeah.
But wouldn't that make those desires, those anxieties, even more powerful if they're kept hidden?
That's a key point, actually. Freud believed that by bringing these unconscious conflicts to light, we can actually lessen their power over us. And that's where dream interpretation comes in, uncovering what he called the latent content.
The true meaning.
The true meaning. Behind all those strange images, those symbols we see in our dreams.
So how do we go about deciphering this dream code?
Well, Freud used a technique called free association, where the patient is encouraged to just kind of let their mind wander freely, making connections between the dream images and their own experiences, memories, emotions.
Like detective work, then, following the clues.
Yeah, until the underlying meaning emerges.
Freud gives a compelling example in the book, right?
He does, yeah.
He describes a patient who dreams of climbing a mountain with a close friend. The friend stumbles, almost falls, but the dreamer doesn't help him.
Right.
Through free association, the dreamer starts to realize something. This friend represents a rival. A rival for, a woman's affection. And the dream expresses this hidden wish for the rival's downfall.
Fascinating, isn't it? How these dreams can give us a window into our deepest, most private thoughts.
Thoughts that we might not even admit to ourselves consciously.
Exactly.
But Freud doesn't stop at dreams. He also emphasizes those profound impacts of childhood experiences, especially those related to family, and as you mentioned, sexuality.
This brings us back to that Oedipus complex.
Right.
Which, as we discussed, Freud believed that children develop these unconscious sexual desires for their opposite sex parent, leading to rivalry with the same-sex parent. But to be clear, Freud wasn't talking about, actual adult sexuality here. He saw these desires as part of a child's normal development, reflecting their sense of self, their relationships with their caregivers.
So these early experiences, even ones we might not remember, they shape us. Our adult personalities, our relationships.
That was Freud's thinking, yes. That these early experiences and how we navigate them, they kind of become imprinted on our psyches.
And influence how we see ourselves, how we interact with others.
Throughout our lives, yeah.
But wouldn't that suggest we're essentially, prisoners of our past?
Not necessarily. While Freud definitely acknowledged the impact, the lasting impact of childhood, he also believed that through psychoanalysis, we can gain insight
into these unconscious patterns.
Yeah. And in doing so, create the possibility for change.
So it's not about erasing the past, but understanding how it might be shaping us today.
Exactly. Bringing those unconscious influences into conscious awareness, and then allowing us to make more informed choices. Breaking free from those repetitive patterns that might be causing distress.
Which brings us to what Freud called neuroses. What did he mean by that term exactly?
Neuroses was his term for a whole range of psychological, even emotional disturbances. We're talking phobias, anxieties, obsessions, even some physical symptoms that doctors couldn't explain. He believed they arose from repressed desires, unresolved conflicts, and especially those that originated, you guessed it, in childhood.
So even those seemingly irrational fears and anxieties, they could actually be symptoms of something much deeper, something in the unconscious.
That was Freud, the revolutionary idea, that these neurotic symptoms weren't random, but meaningful expressions of the unconscious mind, almost like it's trying to communicate, trying to tell us something about its needs, its desires.
So how does psychoanalysis address these neuroses? We've talked about dream interpretation. What other tools did Freud use to access the unconscious?
Well, one of the key tools was something you mentioned earlier, the talking cure.
Right.
Freud encouraged patients to just freely express their thoughts, their feelings, no matter how trivial, how embarrassing they might seem. And this process of, again, free association allows those unconscious thoughts and feelings to surface, to be explored.
It's fascinating, isn't it? That simply talking about our experiences, especially those we've tried to suppress, avoid, could have therapeutic power.
That was Freud's belief, yeah.
Yeah.
He saw that therapeutic relationship as a crucial part of the healing process. He also introduced this concept of transference, where patients unconsciously transfer feelings, expectations from past relationships onto the therapist.
So it's like those unresolved childhood dynamics that you get replayed in the therapy room.
Exactly. And by working through these patterns with the therapist, the patient can gain a deeper understanding of how those early relationships might be influencing their current struggles, their current life.
But this sounds like a very lengthy, intense process.
Yeah.
Did Freud think everyone needed to undergo psychoanalysis?
Not at all. Not at all. He saw it as a tool for understanding the mind, not just a treatment for neurosis.
Right.
He believed his theories could help us all better understand ourselves, our motivations, regardless of whether we're experiencing significant distress or not.
It's like he's offering this new lens to view human behavior, a way to decipher the hidden meanings behind our actions, the actions of others. But we've been focusing so much on this unconscious mind. What about the conscious part? The part of us that, makes decisions, navigates the demands of reality.
That's where the ego comes in.
Okay.
In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore how the ego, according to Freud, tries to manage this complex interplay between the unconscious desires, the demands of reality, and those moral constraints, the superego.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Freud's A General Introduction to Psychoanalysis. We've been on quite a journey, exploring this hidden world, the unconscious, and all those desires and conflicts we're often not even aware of.
Right, but we've also talked about a kind of balancing force, haven't we? Something that helps us manage the demands of everyday life.
The ego.
The ego, exactly.
So what is this ego exactly, and where does it fit into Freud's whole model of the mind?
Well, it's a great question because it's easy to get lost, in this swirling sea of unconscious forces Freud describes. But the ego is essentially the self as we experience it, the part of us that makes decisions, plans for the future, interacts with the world.
So it's like the captain of the ship, trying to steer a course through all the internal and external pressures.
Perfect analogy. And the ego, it has this incredibly difficult job, balancing the demands of reality, those often conflicting desires of the unconscious, what Freud called the id. And on top of that, it has to deal with the superego.
Oh, right, which represents our morals, our values.
Exactly. Often learned from our parents, society.
I'm starting to see why Freud thought the ego was so important. It's constantly mediating between these forces, trying to find a way to satisfy our needs or desires, but also staying true to our values and, functioning in the world. But what happens when the ego can't keep up with all these demands?
That's when we start to see signs of anxiety, stress, even what Freud called neuroses.
Right.
He actually viewed neuroses as a kind of compromise formation, a way for those unconscious desires to find expression.
Even with the ego trying to keep them in check.
Yeah, despite the ego's best efforts.
So, for example, a phobia of dogs, could actually represent some unconscious aggressive impulse that the ego has transformed into its irrational fear.
Exactly. The ego, in its attempt to protect us, right, from unacceptable desires, anxieties, it develops these defense mechanisms.
Like phobias, obsessions,
Yeah.
even physical symptoms sometimes.
Right. It's a way of managing the conflict between the id, the superego, the demands of reality.
It's fascinating how these seemingly irrational symptoms, they actually hold this hidden meaning, representing the ego's attempt to maintain some balance, some control. But this brings up a question. If these unconscious conflicts are at the root of our neuroses, how does psychoanalysis actually help?
Well, the goal isn't to eliminate the unconscious altogether. I mean, that would be impossible. But it's about strengthening the ego, making it more aware of these unconscious forces that are shaping its behavior.
So through analysis, the patient gains this insight into their own mind.
Right, exactly. And then they can develop, more adaptive ways of coping with these internal conflicts.
So empowering the captain of the ship, so to speak, to make more informed decisions even when facing those turbulent internal seas.
Exactly. And as the ego becomes more aware, right, it can start to make choices that are more aligned with the individual's true desires, their values.
It's like Freud's offering us a whole new way of understanding ourselves. Not just our conscious thoughts and actions, but those hidden motivations, those desires that really shape who we are.
And with that understanding comes the potential for greater freedom, more choice. We're not just at the mercy of those unconscious forces anymore.
This deep dive into Freud's A General Introduction to Psychoanalysis has been, I don't know about you, but really eye-opening for me. We've journeyed from those seemingly insignificant slips of the tongue all the way to the depths of the unconscious mind. And that complex interplay between the id, ego, and superego. What stands out to you as the most significant takeaway from all this?
I think it's recognizing that we're not always fully aware of what drives us, our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors. Freud really challenged us to look beyond the surface, to acknowledge the complexity of the human mind, the power of the unconscious.
Absolutely. He gave us a whole new language to understand our inner world. And while some of his ideas have been debated, reinterpreted over the years, there's no denying their influence on psychology, our understanding of ourselves. It's like he handed us a map to this vast, uncharted territory, inviting us to explore the depths of our own minds.
And just like an archaeological dig, that process of self-discovery, it can be challenging, even unsettling at times. But it also holds the promise of uncovering these hidden treasures, gaining a deeper understanding of who we are and why we do the things we do.
And on that note, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, given you a taste of those profound, enduring insights offered by Sigmund Freud. And until next time, happy diving.